a moment. All righty, well, thank you all for taking the time to attend today's meeting. Due to the technical difficulties that we experienced, we will try to get another public meeting on the books potentially for next week so that we can have a little bit of time to share the meeting notice and the press release. So we will go ahead and get started. The agenda today is that we're going to have some opening remarks from both University City as well as the Commission on Stormwater Issues. And then our plan formulator for the study, Janet Buchanan, is going to go through the presentation, which is an overview of the study process as well as kind of where we are today with a tentatively selected plan. Then we're going to go through how we will take comments. And obviously, you know, today was to kick off the public comment period. However, since we did have those technical difficulties, we can push that off a little bit and give a little bit of extra time for sure. And then we'll get to a Q&A at the end. And so we'll do that Q&A in the chat box primarily, which you can see the instructions for how to enter in those chat messages right here on the screen. You'll see that Janet has already done that a couple of times and provided everybody with a couple of different links to click on. At any point, you can also email the UCity flood risk at usace.army.mil. And we are checking that mailbox every day, and so we can get with you, and we can also get with the city if there's any questions that they can answer as well. At this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Sinan Alpaslan with the City of University City. And that, Sinan, I know if you wanted to say a few words, welcome. And then if you want to turn it over to Mr. Thompson after that, that's great as well.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. I'm hoping for the best public participation at this phase, not only because of this technical difficulty, but we were all hoping that this meeting would actually be in person initially, and didn't have that opportunity this time around. And so working on, to do our best given the circumstances. You're all aware of the developing study in our community that is to resolve issues that is a result of riverine flooding in University City that cause economic damages as well as life safety damages. And so the Army Corps is the group that we've selected to help us with that analysis. You may also be aware of that MSD, the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, being the funder of this study through their operations, maintenance, and construction improvements, also known as OMCI funding tax source. And the Army Corps has started this study has been working on it about a year now, and so we are excited about the results. They have come to our different boards, the Commission on Stormwater Issues, as well as City Council several times to brief them on their findings. And there have been various requests for additional information and analyses, and I'm glad that the team has helped us throughout this process and to reach this level. And so this wouldn't have been possible without the tireless efforts of our Commission on Stormwater Issues. That I'd like to now turn this over to Chairman Thompson to add his comments.
Mr. Alpaslan, before you start, this is just citizen taxpayer. How do we get access to it? I know there's technical difficulties, but this is not acceptable. Something of this magnitude, and it's a lecture, and we don't get to see the documentation, is not acceptable.
Hi, sir. This is Matt. Yeah, this is Matt from the Corps. If you use the link that was in the press release and you just put a 1 after the USACE, so you do USACE 1, then that should get you to the presentation. But these slides will also be put on our website tomorrow, and then we're going to hold another public meeting very similar to this one that doesn't have the issues. Maybe next week. I'm going to get with Sinan on that tomorrow. Okay, Mr. Thompson, if you want to go ahead and continue.
Yes, thank you. So as chairman of the University City Stormwater Issues Commission, I just wanted to express our appreciation to the Army Corps of Engineers for hosting this meeting and also for inviting the Stormwater Commission to participate in and contribute to the technical reviews and to the working group meetings that have taken place over the last several months. We are Stormwater Issues Commission is a group of it's a non-paid commission that's under the auspices of the University City and City Council, and so we've been come together to address the same kind of issues, and so we have active studies and monthly meetings to address these sort of issues also. So we're kind of working in conjunction in a parallel way with what the Army Corps study is doing. So I would invite any of the other commission members, several who are on, to, if they want to say something, please do so now. If not, Tim?
Yes, Todd, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Councilmember Tim Cusick, and I want to thank everyone for attending and the Army Corps for doing this, especially to reiterate what Sinan said about our Commission on Stormwater Issues and their continual work on this process and on this problem of flooding in University City. And then I would like to point out to those that are reading or that are in this meeting or will view this meeting electronically and for the next meeting, that what the Army Corps is presenting this evening is a tentatively selected plan. This is not the final plan. We need the community's input to see how this plan will work out and what will be the best plan for residents in University City. So please take advantage of the different methods of being able to contact the Army Corps or Sinan or myself so that we have the input from our residents to find out how they view this plan. And that's all I would have to say. And again, thank you to everyone for participating.
And in addition to what Tim just said, the Commission, UC Stormwater Issues Commission, will continue to participate in those activities and provide review and comment throughout the extent of the Army Corps' study. And we would appreciate comments also, either directly or through the U-City Commission or the U-City Council. So turn it back over to Matt, I guess. Yeah,
that sounds good. Thank you, Chairman Thompson, and thank you, Councilman Cusick. Yeah, we will for sure continue working with both the Commission and Council, and I know Janet will talk a little bit about that during the presentation, so we look forward to that for sure. At this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Janet Buchanan. She is our plan formulator for the study process. Janet, feel free to take it away.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy Monday, and I'm glad you could join us. In case anyone on the phone is still not able to get into the WebEx, I'll just say one more time, the change to the link that you saw is just to add a 1 after the USACE in the link, and that will get you access to the presentation that we're seeing on our screen. So as Matt Jones said, I am the planner on the project, and I too was hoping to have this meeting in person. It would have been really nice to have all of these stakeholders in the room. I've got a slide here with lots of the agencies and groups that we've been coordinating with. But we'll do our best to coordinate virtually as we've been doing this past year. And yes, please do feel free to throw questions into the chat while I'm talking and follow up with us afterwards by email. This really is open to public comment, and we do want to receive feedback. And just as Mr. Cusick said, this is very much a tentatively selected plan, so it's not finalized. We're looking for feedback. We're looking for input. So I hope that you all will save up some questions to the Q&A at the end. All right. So an overview of our study. The purpose of this study was to re-evaluate the flooding problems and potential plans to reduce flood risk in University City. And it's a re-evaluation because there was an authorized project from 1988 that had various solutions in it for reducing flood risk. So we're looking back at that study and seeing if we would confirm that project or identify a revised recommendation. The overall schedule is we started the study in April of 2020, and it's a 3-year study, so still targeting 3 years to completion. The limits of the authority of the study, we are limited to just the University City branch watershed of the Upper River des Peres, so none of the rest of the river and none of the other major tributaries. And flood risk management is the only authorized purpose. As for our period of analysis, we're looking 50 years into the future. So assuming we construct something or do something in 2025, that takes us looking to 2075 for the extent that we're looking at. Okay, so here's a map of the study area. The red line is the outline of the watershed, so the area that drains into the River des Peres. And of note, there's the green dot on the right-hand side, which says river goes underground. So that is the place where the river goes into what we call the tubes, that underground series of channels that takes the river into St. Louis, under the city, through Forest Park, and then eventually out to South St. Louis and to the Mississippi River. I've added some images here. On the left are 2 pictures of the tubes, the large concrete channel entrance, and then the one that's kind of dark is the interior of that entrance with some people there, so you can see how big it is at that point. And then on the right, some images of flooding in University City. As we all know at this point, there's been significant flooding, several flood events, and I've got those listed on the next slide. So the problems identified under the study are risks to life safety. So that includes direct loss of life, flooding of critical infrastructure, such as fire stations, health infrastructure, flooding of evacuation routes so that people cannot exit from their home or their business. And secondly, economic damage resulting from the flood inundation. So that would primarily focus on flooding of structures, so you have damage to the structure and also the contents and vehicles, but that can also include disruption of traffic, emergency costs, and things of that nature. And I'll scoot to the recent flooding in the study area. Got some flood years listed here on the right-hand side, so this is just the recent flooding. As we're aware, there's more events going back further than that, but it's clear that this is an ongoing problem. The opportunities identified under the study were increased outdoor recreation, improving communication of flood risk to the public, reducing sewer backups, improving water quality, wildlife habitat, community resiliency to flood events such as reduced response and recovery time, and improved mental and physical health. So for those opportunities, those are just things where as we go through, we're always trying to find ways to enhance the impact of the study and make it more beneficial. So the objectives were down to 3. So reducing life safety risk due to flooding, reducing economic damage due to flooding, and increasing recreational opportunities associated with the flood features. Our process as the Corps of Engineers is a long and somewhat circular process. So this is what we call the washing machine diagram, where we make sure to engage with stakeholders throughout the process. So touching base again and again with the city, the commission, the public, and other groups that are relevant. We make sure to gather evidence throughout. So when new information comes to light, we continue to incorporate that. And we conduct various types of analysis. So H&H is hydraulic and hydrologic analysis, looking at flood depths and velocities and things like that. Also looking at a structure inventory of what buildings are in the area and their features. Life safety, so those risks to people. Economic analysis, so the crunching the numbers on the flood damage. Impacts to cultural resources such as historic structures, including buildings and also other structures. So after all those analyses, we create several alternatives, which I'll show you today, and then we select a plan. But of course, at this point, it's just a tentatively selected plan, not the final plan. So we go through all these steps to get to this point, and then we go out for input, we take comments, and then within the Corps, we also have lots of different review processes outside the St. Louis district so that we get lots of feedback to refine our analyses and kind of go through the circle again and come up with a better plan at the end of it. This is our study schedule. So the green things have already happened, and here we are in the yellow, the draft report going out to the public and the public meeting. The next step after these events is what's called the agency decision milestone, which is where the higher-ups at the Corps of Engineers review our then recommended plan by that point. And I've got a note here that we might push this out if the LPP is requested, and that's called a locally preferred plan, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, but that's if a change is made that's very significant to the tentatively selected plan, then more time is needed to develop that as a separate item. So I want to stress again the importance of public input. It really is a key ingredient in the planning process. We need input on the significant issues and the impacts that are actually happening to people in the study area. And we also appreciate input on the potential features and alternatives, that things that might be implemented. We need to know, how those would be approached and real-world opinions on whether those would work in the community. So we know that people living in the community have the best first-hand knowledge of flooding and flood impacts. And we don't know what we don't know. So we really do appreciate input and feedback from you all. All right, this slide is a little bit dense, so I won't necessarily go through everything. But as part of our planning process, we do look at lots of different existing conditions in the study area. We look at the area involved. We do the H&H modeling, hydrologic and hydraulic modeling to find the flood depths and the flood velocities, the high water marks and things of that nature. And I want to note and give special thanks to the Commission on Stormwater Issues for providing the high watermark data that helped in calibration of the modeling, and the 2008 flood was used as that calibration event. For structures, the model showed that in the 500-year flood, so the very big, very rare flood, there were over 1,000 structures impacted. There's a minority population in University City of 52%, so that is higher than the state average of 20%, so we're keeping that in mind. For critical infrastructure, there are 3 schools and a fire department / emergency services structure. And there are 2 cultural and historic areas. There's the University Heights Subdivision number 1 and the University City Education District. So we looked at lots of other things too, and those are all in the draft report, but I didn't want to get too far into the weeds on those today. So after looking at the existing conditions, we look at the future without project conditions. So what would the future be like if we did nothing? And that is helpful to compare with any future project that we project. So I've got a few things here, and again, I don't think I'll go through all of them, but just to show that we've looked at several different categories and are showing, changes that are somewhat significant in some cases, but mostly, the watershed is fairly developed already. We're not looking at huge changes in the future, but it's good to compare against. Okay, so I've got another diagram here on our planning process that's just a little bit different. So what we do once we've got our problems identified and looking at the future, what the issues would be, is we look at what's called measures. And measures are solutions to the flooding problem. So we started by identifying 15 different types of measures from various places. And those are structural, non-structural, natural, and nature-based. Then we go through what's called screening, where those measures are evaluated using a mixture of professional judgment from ourselves and the city, criteria that we're required to look at called P&G criteria, cost and benefit analysis, and whether those measures meet our study objectives. So through that screening, 5 measures were removed. Then we got to formulating alternatives, and what that means is pulling measures together in different combinations in a way that makes sense. So we looked at 10 different types and screened 4 of those out, and that left us with what's called a final array, so a final list of 6 different alternatives. And those are all at a low level of design right now. What we do is start with a low level that's comparable across all the alternatives, so that we can choose correctly between them without sinking too much time and money and effort into each individual one before knowing too much about it. And then out of those 6 alternatives, 1 tentatively selected plan was chosen. So this is our list of measures. I've got a few structural, several non-structural, and a few nature-based. And in the end, the nature-based ones were removed, and a couple of the non-structural and structural were removed to get to our final list here that were developed into alternatives. So we've got detention basins, levees and floodwalls, channel and bridge modification, elevation of structures, floodproofing, acquisition, a flood warning system, risk communication and education, and then outdoor recreation was considered as well. Okay, and I wanted to mention here that since this is a reevaluation of that 1988 report, we had to look specifically at the measures that were in that report. So there were about 2.5 miles of channel modification, including bridge replacement, bank stabilization, and grade control. And so re-looking at those, it was confirmed that the measure for channel changes did cause downstream impacts or greater flooding going downstream into the tubes out of our study area. So that was not acceptable. The other elements, there was a flood forecasting and warning plan, and that was definitely fine to continue to consider, and the recreation features as well. But the environmental features were sort of tied in with the channel modifications and were not complete as a standalone measure, so we deemed that those would not be moved forward. Okay, now I've got a bunch of pictures, so I wanted to just kind of show and give a better sense of what the measures were that we were talking about. So for channel modification, this would consist of changes to the channel itself in the river, so potentially making it wider or deeper, changing the shape, changing the material, to reduce the flooding issue. And the picture on the right is obviously an older installation, but it's a concrete lined channel behind Wilson Avenue. So that's obviously what's already been done. For detention basins, the idea is that a certain amount of flow would be diverted from the river into the basin, and there it would be able to fill up and reduce the peak of the flooding that is carried up downstream and would be slowly released back into the river as the floodwaters recede, so it would alleviate the flood peak. And the picture on the right is actually from North St. Louis, a fairly recent project. And so, yep, just showing kind of the scale that these detention basins can be. Levees and flood walls. Hopefully most folks are familiar with what a levee is. It's a large earthen embankment where the water is supposed to stay on one side and an area behind it is supposed to stay dry. A flood wall is a very similar concept, but it's a concrete, or typically a concrete structure, which is vertical, takes up much less of a land footprint, but tends to be a lot more expensive. For the non-structural items, I'll spend a little bit more time because we have a lot of detail here. So for floodproofing, this slide has some wet floodproofing features. So the top left shows kind of a diagram of the water being allowed into the basement of a structure. So that's the wet floodproofing part. Then the utilities have to be raised above the level of the flood. So up to above the, into the living area, for example. And the wet floodproofing will, let's see, what's the term? Alleviate the hydrostatic pressure on the basement wall. And there's a picture on the right showing a flood vent that would let that water into the lower part of the building. There's also dry floodproofing, where a barrier could be put up actively against a doorway or a window to keep floodwater out. But we know that flooding in this area comes very quickly, and so we do have some concerns about the time it would take to be warned about a flood and then to have someone be able to put something in place. So we're generally trying to stay away from any active features. But there's possibly some that would be passive. So this picture that's third from the left on the top is just a doorway, and that, if that's kept closed as a matter of course, that could be a potential passive dry floodproofing feature. Okay, one more set of wet floodproofing elements. So this is the same building, but on the inside, you can see the pictures on the left, that the interior space has been elevated somewhat. So those sort of sensitive woodwork features, those are all on higher ground now. And that can be appropriate for historic structures to try and salvage and keep those cultural resources above the level of the flood. And here's a slide just showing some of the options for elevating utilities. So it can be done on the interior of the home. The picture on the top left is just showing the utilities raised within the basement. And the picture on the right is showing the utilities raised outside of the home on a new additional platform. Then, of course, you can raise the whole building. And so this is elevation of the whole structure. So a house can be lifted up entirely on its foundation and set upon a higher, different type of foundation. And flood risk obviously goes down with these types of measures, and so does flood insurance. So that's definitely a plus of these non-structural elements. You can see in the example that flood insurance premiums go down a long time. The example is with elevation, but some floodproofing also does decrease flood insurance premiums. So we've been in contact with FEMA about that, and we'll continue to do so since we know that's very important for implementation and making sure that people are paying less money when they have less flood risk. Okay, then we have acquisition and buyouts. I know this has been discussed with the city before, and a lot of people are familiar with the Wilson Avenue buyouts of those homes that were repeatedly flooded. So the idea, of course, is that the property that's been repeatedly flooded or severely flooded is acquired, it's bought by the city, it's demolished, and it's turned into open green space that cannot be developed any further, so that the flood, any flood that comes up out of the river into that green space isn't causing any damage to a structure or to its occupants. The flood warning system, it's definitely an important feature, and the Commission on Stormwater Issues has been developing a municipal system for University City. So I might not say too much about this because I know that they're working on this, but suffice it to say they've got a lot of data going into it, including just very real-time data from rain gauges. And there are components that would connect that data to the cloud and then issue an alarm. And there's a public portal website for that as well. Okay, so I know that was a quick go through all of the measures. I want to get to the alternatives now. So this is how we got to our final array of 6 alternatives. So these are the ones that we had a little bit more detail developed for. This one is the authorized plan. So that's the channel modifications from 1988 with modifications. So as I mentioned, those channel modifications on their own would create a flood risk downstream of the study area that was not acceptable. And so the team added 2 detention basins to help alleviate that flooding. And those are shown here in the graphic, but we'll see them in more detail on the next slide. Then the detention basins on their own, the team looked at 5 sites initially, and 2 of those sites were determined to be hydraulically feasible. So they were big enough, they would have enough storage to really make a difference on the flood level. And the greater effects were present higher upstream in the watershed. And of course, the higher ground provided the greatest storage because then you could dig down further and create that storage volume. The 2 locations that were moved forward, we're calling them Db3 Detention Basin 3 and Db4. So Db3 is directly adjacent to Olive Boulevard. It's at the location of the Seafood City site and that large parking lot. It's about 15 acres in size. And it's, as we know, it's a working space. There's businesses there. It's a high traffic area. However, it is high ground. It's a large area, and so it would provide a great deal of benefit. It would reduce the flood a lot. Then we've got Db4, which is on the left in the graphic, and that is actually outside University City. It's within the city of Overland. It is directly adjacent to the river as well, and it's at the site currently of a dog park at Woodson Road Park. And that site is about 9 acres. It's also kind of high ground, so again, would provide a lot of storage. But because it's not, an active business, it's a lot cheaper of a site. So you get more bang for your buck. Both detention basins are dry basins, so they would be dry most of the time. And that would mean that when a storm does come in, they have the maximum storage. So for these detention basins, we looked at 2 options. There was detention basin 3 and 4 together and detention basin 4 on its own. We did look at a levee and flood wall option, and we started by looking at a long stretch along the whole study area, breaking it up in ways that made sense. But for several reasons, it's very hard to find a configuration that really works and isn't interrupted too much in an urban area. So only one made it to the final alternative. So this was Reach 2A, and it's mostly flood walls to try and reduce that footprint. Then we looked at acquisitions and buyouts, looking at the 25-year floodplain. And so what that would mean is the structures that you see in the graphic on top of the blue, those would be acquired and turned to natural space, open space. Any buyouts and acquisition that is included in a Corps of Engineers recommended plan would be mandatory, which is an interesting feature of our process. So we know that that's an interesting and sometimes hard to swallow item, but of course, it's typically only the structures that are repeatedly flooded. Next, we looked at floodproofing and elevation of structures, so kind of a combination. 500 residential structures in that 25-year floodplain. Most of them would be flood-proofed, and 7 of them would be elevated. We know that this would affect historic structures, particularly in the University City Subdivision number 1, which is at the downstream end. And And again, dry floodproofing was used in the analysis, but we know that there's a lot that still needs to be worked out in terms of type of floodproofing and how that's implemented. And number 7, looking at elevation only. So what if we didn't do any floodproofing and committed to just elevating the homes? So this was developed for slightly fewer structures in the case that no floodproofing was possible. And I should also note, and I put here, voluntary participation. So with these elevation and with floodproofing, it's definitely voluntary. Okay, and the last one is what would happen if we added Detention Basin 4 to a non-structural solution where there's elevation and floodproofing and Detention Basin 4. Okay, that was a lot. So now we're getting to how we evaluated the alternatives. I'll go quickly through this. It's a little bit dense, but we are required to look at national benefits, so economic costs and benefits against each other, regional economic development benefits, so looking at local employment and labor income. We have to look at environmental quality, so the impacts to threatened and endangered species, wetlands, hazardous waste sites, and those cultural resources. And last but definitely not least, other social effects, including that life safety risk, critical infrastructure protected, socioeconomic consequences, and of course, recreation. So I've got a big table here, and I want to note again, these slides will be made available along with this presentation on our project website. So I know this is a lot of detail tonight, but you can refer back to this as you decide when and how to provide any comments. So this table shows kind of the national costs and benefits. The cost that I've got highlighted with the red oval is the one that has the highest amount of net annual benefits. So that's the most annual benefit minus annual cost. And so the one that has the highest benefit, we refer to as the NED plan. That's the National Economic Development Plan. And so kind of by default, that becomes the front runner as we're looking at the alternative. But with those 4 accounts that we saw on the previous slide, there's definitely a case to be made in any of the other categories to move forward. So, okay. So how we selected the tentatively selected plan. We, back in May, looked at those alternatives and selected the NED plan, alternative number 6, which was floodproofing and elevation. So entirely voluntary participation by people that want to reduce the impact of flooding on their structure, whether it's their home or their business. It had the highest net benefits. It had the second highest benefit to cost ratio. And so obviously those numbers are important to the Corps of Engineers so that we can justify it up the chain and get it funded. They like to see nice, healthy amount of benefits for a project that really is providing flood risk management. So that's the one that we went with. That is the tentatively selected plan. The draft report that is coming out today, made available today on our website, provides details on the planning process, so how we went through the whole process, and more details on all of the measures and alternatives, so how those were developed. And I've got a big yellow box here because, as I've said, and I'll continue to say, the TSP will be further refined in the next stage of the study. And if it is refined further and changes are made, but the city is still not finding it acceptable for any number of reasons, a locally preferred plan can be chosen instead. The plan does have to have high enough net benefits and a high enough benefit to cost ratio that we can justify it, but there's a whole range of things that can be done. So in order to help the city make that decision, we're looking for public input, of course, and we're also going to be refining the plan by using a different proportion of non-structural measures. So what would happen if we added more elevation than floodproofing? What would happen if we used Detention Basin 3 rather than Detention Basin 4? we're also tracking that, of course, Detention Basin 4 is in the city of Overland, so their participation would make or break including that. Then we also have the types of non-structural measure. So that's the type of floodproofing, specifically would something where you elevate your utilities or you elevate the entire structure, how would that impact the numbers? And we're thinking it probably would impact them a fair amount. So that next step of analysis is going to be very important. So then once we've done those next analyses, University City can choose to select a different alternative, like I mentioned, as the locally preferred plan, and that would require a waiver to be approved by headquarters of the Corps of Engineers. But we are tracking that is an option, and that is included in the schedule. And yeah, that is yet to be determined. I did want to mention that the city is also planning to conduct a floodproofing and elevation survey. And based on some limitations that we have, we're not actually going to be involved with that, but we are in coordination with the city on that survey. And the responses would definitely help inform our choices on the participation rate. So as we're looking at how many people might be interested in participating in floodproofing or elevation, that's going to be very, very useful information to us and the study. And I've got a little graph here, but that's just a rough, a rough look at how we do our sensitivity analysis for participation. So on our end, we'll also be crunching numbers to see, if not that many people are interested in floodproofing, how does that change things? Or if everyone wants to participate, will there be enough money to actually get that done, that type of thing. Okay, so I appreciate you sticking with me through that long presentation, but I have only 2 slides remaining. So the public review period starts now, and as Matt mentioned, we will extend it based on the fact that this public meeting may have gotten a little bit lost with the technical issues with not everybody able to attend. But the idea is that it's a 30-day period. We want public input. We will accept comment through our email address as the primary way. And that email address for those on the phone is ucityfloodrisk@usace.army.mil. And that will be on our website as well. And for those of you that like to submit by mail, that's definitely also possible, and I've got the address on the next slide. And I guess I'll show, okay, so the next slide is the Q&A. So before we get to that, I did want to pause here and let Sinan or somebody from the commission speak if they want to about all of this information, and just to sort of set us up for the Q&A because this has been a lot, and I've been very grateful that we've had a lot of meetings together, because the core planning process is kind of its own beast, and the city's been just very informed and detail-oriented, which we appreciate. So, I wanted to pause here and see, perhaps if Sinan, did you want to add anything at this point before we get to the Q&A?
Janet, the public comment period is going to be 30 days from the time of a later meeting, did you say?
Yes, I think we can accommodate that. Yes.
Okay, and also probably this was discussed at the City Council study session just recently. But in terms of the next steps in the process, do you have a vision of that, or do you know that? Do you know at this point if it's going to evolve any certain way to bring us to a completion level of this phase? I think in October or November.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll go back to this slide. So the sort of key decision point on the tentatively selected plan versus a locally preferred plan, we're planning to get more information on that to the city in August, September. So that'll have the time for public comment included. So all of those comments will come in during August, and then we'll have September to digest and show the new analyses, and probably have that decision point in late September is what we're tracking right now. It's a little bit fluid, but we're very, we really do want to make sure that there's enough time and enough detail for the city to make that decision. I know it's a lot of information, and the study process can just be very quick and very sort of rushed feeling at times with the amount of information that we're working on. So we do want to make sure that that decision has adequate time and information. So we can adjust as needed, I guess, is my point.
Well, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Oh, is that a hand from Mr. Cusick? Go ahead.
Thank you, Janet. Before this meeting ends, Sanan, would you be able to present or give just a very, very half-a-minute explanation of the early warning system? After yesterday's rain event, could you let those people that are listening in know what the status is on our early warning system that Janet spoke about earlier? And then, Janet, what I would like to ask you is, for those people that would like to make comments, what do you want them to comment on? What do you want them to say? What do you want to hear from people? Do you want to hear people say, yes, we like detention basins, no, we don't. Yes, we're in favor of flood-proofing methods, or no, we don't. We don't want an unsightly wall down through the middle of University City to be used as a flood wall. Specifically, what is it that residents can provide you with? Do you want information on their flooding, how often they're flooded, or where they live and if they're flooded? So could you be a little more specific on how residents could help us out with it?
Sure, that's a great question. I flipped to the next slide because I had a couple of prompts here. In theory, the public comment can include anything that the public wants us to know. And so, yes, that will definitely include flood events that have impacted you. What did they look like? How often has it happened? If you're comfortable sharing your address, where did it happen? We would be very interested to know that, so that we're aware, you know, what has actually been happening. Flood damage, road closures, cleanup, you know, actual impacts, actual, just negative impacts of flooding, along with dates, if anyone has dates of when those things happened. I know those can stick in the mind. And then I've underlined this third point, interest in floodproofing, elevation, or other measures. So if you've seen anything that you really like in those alternatives, let us know. If there's something that you really don't like or you have serious concerns about, let us know. Really any kind of gauge of what these options have sparked for you as to what you think would work well in the community. We'd be very interested to know that. And I might pass the mic to Matt Jones in case I'm missing something as a prompt for public input. So Matt, did you have anything that you would add to ask for specifically?
Yeah. Thanks, Janet. I would definitely agree with everything that you said, and I would also add, you know, if there's something that motivates the public and that's really what they want, we would really like to know that. So if, for example, you know, all of the residents are concerned about reducing their flood insurance or potential flood insurance, you know, that's really important because that lets the city know and the commission know and then us know that we need to really use measures and identify measures that will do that, because not all of them will do that. So I think kind of knowing what really is important to the public is important for our study process, as well as for the elected leaders who will ultimately have to make decisions about whether we move forward or not. So yeah, thanks for that. And just to kind of go ahead and start hitting on that chat box, Janet, we did have one comment at the very end. We have several comments, but while we're on this theme of public comments, the very last question in the chat was, will public comments all be posted And will the responses and answers to all of the public comments be posted for all citizens to see? You can hide the name of the citizen, but still include the question comments and have all the responses. Janet, I think I know the answer, but I believe that all comments that are sent in, including the ones that are in the chat box right now, we will include in the final report, right, as per the NEPA process. I think that is included in an appendix. But from my standpoint, we could also include some of those common Q&As on our website so that people can see that the questions and the answers all real time, much earlier than they would actually see the report. What do you think about that, Janet?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. Yes, we will definitely be addressing those in the report, and then, yes, along with the presentation as well. Yeah, that will all be documented.
So in terms of a repository of documents for public to view, traditionally it's done at the city clerk's office, hard copies. And I know that these documents especially they are very large in size, and so electronic transmission may be challenging for most of us. And so are you planning for having that type of a location? If we have, I have the documents, I haven't really printed them out, but, I can make everything available at a central location for public viewing. Again, getting them out electronically will be somewhat of an issue for me, but I know U.S. Army Corps has a file transfer website that they used before. Was there any plans for that, Janet, for our citizens to know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to flip back to this slide. So the main place that we're making the documents available is on the project website, and there's the link there at the bottom, and the QR code will take you there. And the documents are available on the right-hand side on that webpage. There are several documents, as Sinan mentioned. There's the main report, which is very large. It's just about 115 pages. And then there are several appendices, which are a lot shorter, but there's several of them. And so, yes, it's kind of a lot. We had not planned to print out copies to be made available at this point. But if there is significant interest in that, it's something we can explore. I think, generally people have been interacting virtually this last year. So we're hoping that, an online format will be able to get the document to reach most people. But yeah, if that's something that you think would really expand the reach and would be worth doing, I think we can definitely talk about printing some more copies and making those available.
Thank you, Janet. One more, during this process, in response to the citizen questions, I saw some just now, there were some inquiries about the MSD's previously proposed tanks project. And so if there are more documents produced during the process, is it your intention to make those documents also available at this website?
Yes. The idea is that the webpage will be kind of a one-stop shop for the key documents like that. So, I'm not tracking the exact comment that you're talking about, but yes, the webpage does also have right now an frequently asked questions or FAQ sheet that has some links, including, I believe, to an MSD site and the FEMA site that shows the National Flood Insurance Program information. So yes, that's the idea, and we will definitely, if we receive comment from the city or from the public saying, please put this information up, make it available, we'll be happy to add that to the webpage, definitely.
Thank you. Mr. Cusick asked a question about the status of the rain gauges installed at this point, is it okay to answer that?
Yes, go ahead.
And we have had 2 rain gauges installed in our community. Per our commission's examination, Dr. Kriz and Mr. Stein are active members that worked on the flood early warning system install and system establishment in our community. And so one more gauge was designed for a location in the city of Olivet in the Indian Meadows Park. And so we're really close now to complete that install in the city of Olivet. In fact, this week we're looking to, once the utility locates are complete, we're looking to work together with the city of Olivet and have the trench completed for our pouring of concrete and the installation of the pole atop that, and then coordinate that with our commissioners for the install of the 3rd rain gauge, at which time the system will be complete in terms of its sensing and then the data collection, and then the next step that I know our commissioners have already advanced it to that level where the data from the field will be input into the system to develop the warning notices. And there was a Sunday morning event that triggered an alarm already in our system, and the commissioners additionally emphasized the importance of a geographically geographical enhancement of that data collection due to the localized events that happen and affect our community. So the Indian Meadows Park gauge will complete that, and then we'll be ready for the system usage after that.
Thanks for that, Sinan. So Janet, I don't know if you want to go ahead and we can start going through the chat box, unless anybody else from the council or the commission wanted to add anything. I did also want to share that, so the documents that we're tracking, putting on our website is the main report, as Janet was talking about, the appendices to that report. There is an FAQ, a frequently asked questions sheet that we will post on there, and then all of these slides that you're seeing today or you're hearing from will also be posted on there as well. So, and then of course, as several folks mentioned, as new documents become relevant and or we're made aware of, or if there's certain questions that we can provide other documents, then we will most definitely put that on our website. But we can go ahead and move into the Q&A portion, Janet, if that's okay with you.
Go right ahead.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning, and we can just go. I just don't want to miss any of them. So the very first question, well, actually there's 2 questions that are pertinent to, that are regarding the Greensfelder Park. So the first question, Janet, was, has the flood mitigation issue or studies for Greensfelder Park, have they been included as part of the Army Corps of Engineers, or, have we included those as part of our study process?
Yeah, so I just quickly Googled to make sure that I was understanding where that's located, and if the Greensfelder Park, is it Pacific, Missouri? So if it's that one, that is outside our study area, just outside the scope of this study. But if that's incorrect, and it is within University City, I know sometimes there's small parks that can evade our attention. So if that's the case, if you're the person that made that comment, feel free to add to the chat or make a comment verbally. But yes, if it's Greensfelder Park in Pacific, that's outside this study.
That's not the right location, Janet. This one is in University City. It's in, northeast part of the city. It's a very small park.
It's near the Woodson and Kempland, upstream where the headwaters are almost of the river that appear into University City. Greensfelder Park is a community park. There was a plan for its further improvement. I'm not sure what stage it is in terms of parks improvement at this point, but it was discussed in the past, and there was some grant funding used for developing a plan for the park for further examination.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for that information. Clearly, I was very ignorant of that, so that's good to know. And looking at that location, yes, I mean, that's definitely within the study area, of course. I would say we haven't looked at anything specifically for that, but if there are documents on that effort, we would definitely take those and take those into account. Are there any, did you say it was a grant proposal, or what might you have that could be made available to us?
Yeah, I'll dig that up, provide it to you, Jane.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sinan. And Janet, I did the same thing, and I found a couple of different Greensfelder parks and complexes, so I was doing the same thing. But actually, the next. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And location-wise, it's really very close to the detention basin, proposed detention basin that would be off of Woodson.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that, Mr. Thompson. Okay, so the next question, and Sinan, this might be something that you wanted to talk about. What has been the investment or total expenditures made by the City of University City directly or indirectly to the Army Corps of Engineers?
The Army Corps of Engineers proposal for this study, the fee that the Army Corps of Engineers is charging, that is $650,000, and that has been fully paid at this point. And that will take us through the completion of this study. And in addition, again, that is back to my introductory comments. That is funded by the MSD operations, maintenance, and construction improvements funding in our community. So we get reimbursement for that expenditure from MSD. The additional staff time and commission's time, our council's time, are additional investments into this undertaking.
Yeah, for sure, Sinan. And then just to build on that even further, just to kind of explain what that looks like in the total, the grand scheme of things. So the $650,000 that you referenced, that gets us to a complete feasibility study. And that then within that feasibility study are some preliminary construction costs. So once we get the report finished, the feasibility report finished, and then it goes through all of its approvals through higher level Corps of Engineers, assuming all of that gets approved, then that's when we put in a request to Congress for additional construction funds, and then we enter into an agreement with the city whereby, we build the project and it's cost shared a certain amount between the Corps, the federal dollars as well as University City dollars, or however you choose to get those funds. But just to kind of show the overview of what the process is like, I just wanted to kind of add that in there. Alrighty. The next question was, have you completed studies above U-City watershed that flow into U-City? Doesn't that have a big bearing on what our plan would be or should be?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. I'm clicking on the study area slide again. So the watershed boundary, like I mentioned, is this red line. So it does extend up into Olivet and Overland, but it's just this area. So this is the upper headwaters of the river. And the green dot that is on the left side of the screen, the text is a little bit hard to read, but it says 800 CFS threshold. And so that is the, by statute, we are required to cut off looking at waters that are too small. And so that is the cutoff point. That's the upper end of what we're looking at. But I just mostly wanted to show that this map, this is the upper end. So we are looking all the way up to that green dot and the drainage area there. I'm not familiar with any other studies that have happened before now in that area. Yeah, as I say, it's the upper headwaters, so the streams, the tributaries are all pretty small. So there's no studies available above that point. So that's the short answer.
Okay, thanks, Janet. And then there was another follow-up question to my funding response to myself and Sinan. So I wanted to touch on that really quick. So how are we planning on paying for the construction, or will it cost us more money? Can you give an idea of the cost share for other municipalities? So for this particular project, we are, if it were to move to construction, construction costs for the would be cost shared, 65% federal and 35% non-federal. So of course, the actual dollar amount would just depend on what the ultimate, recommended plan moving forward is, whether that's the LPP or the current TSP or any variation of that. But I just wanted to provide that. That is the cost share. It's pretty typical with these flood risk management studies, where the 65% is the burden on the federal government, and then 35% on the non-federal sponsor. As to how University City would pay for that, that's not something that I can answer. But Sinan, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all. Any kind of like revenue source for construction on the city side of things.
Not determined so far, but we're anxiously awaiting for the results from this study. And however, 65% federal participation is, I believe, a good good way to leverage our funds, our local funds, for a construction project that can address some of the flooding issues in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sinan. Okay, so the next question in the chat was, how will the proposed multi-million-gallon tanks under consideration from MSD installation of tanks impact this or any plans? Janet, I'm not sure if you are able to answer that, because I'm not aware of the MSD tanks, but if you don't, maybe Sinan could jump in, or someone from the commission.
Well, I'll start by saying, go ahead, Sinan, go ahead.
Sorry, Janet, the proposal was that came to University City a while back, and there was a location considered for it, collected public input. It was a proposal that was, to my, based on my memory, it was withdrawn by MSD at the time. And so that is a proposal, as I understand it, it is geared toward solving combined sewer overflows into those issues into the river De Pere. So MSD is under the consent decree to solve those issues in their service area that includes University City. And what MSD committed to after that exercise was to bring this back to their drawing board and come up with a solution, as they called it, a comprehensive solution, and bring that forward. We checked with MSD about maybe 6 months ago or so. Was there that proposal? Was that ready? And it wasn't ready at the time. And so since then, we haven't heard back about another proposal so far ready to be considered.
Yeah, thanks, Sinan. I knew a little bit of that detail, but not all of it. And I also see that we do have a representative from MSD present. So that's what happens when you come to a public meeting. Sometimes you get called on. So I see Jeff Reepy is in the list of names. Jeff, if you had anything to add to that, I'd pass the mic to you for a moment.
Sure. Thank you, Janet. I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think Sinan covered it pretty well. MSD was looking at one of the similar sites to what the Corps has considered for one of the detention basins, and the MSD's project that was at that location, as Sinan mentioned, has been kind of pulled back at this time, and so we're looking at other alternatives. That's not a group that I'm directly involved in, so I don't have the latest update on exactly where they are, but I think in general I will concur with what Sinan stated.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff and Janet and Sinan. We can go ahead and move on to the next question. So Janet, could you move us back to the timeline or the schedule slide? I believe it was slide 11.
Yes.
And I think that kind of covers the next couple of questions. So the question is there a published timeline that details to date and or projects projects exactly how many citizen and community engagement opportunities or sessions will be held? So as you guys can see on this study schedule, the third line down, we did hold a public scoping meeting. Unfortunately, that was also virtual. So I know that it's not ideal and it's not what any of us would choose if we could choose between in-person or virtual. But that was held at the end of September of 2020. That was to really gather information and to, talk with the public about the scoping of the project before we really started getting heavy into the details and the designing of the different alternatives. And so this particular meeting, and of course we will have another one of these due to the technical issues we experienced, this is really to share with the public what the findings of the draft report are as of right now, and to open up public comment, a public comment period on the draft report as it stands. In the future, I suppose we could have, if there is a public sentiment of wanting more public meetings, that would be something we could work with the city and the commission on. I will say there's a question later on as well about, and I think it was actually a private message about kind of the interactions between the commission, the council, and us, the Corps. So I wanted to touch on that really quickly. I think there's been a lot of good open communication between the three parties involved. Obviously, the city relies heavily on the commission's expertise, and as have we, the Corps, to receive certain information, like Janet was mentioning, the high water marks, were very useful for us in calibrating our model. But I will say, you know, we've been to the commission and the city council a few times, and those are public meetings. And so those are more opportunities for citizens to engage their elected officials as well as their appointed officials. And, you know, we'll continue to do that. So as we were talking about earlier, we anticipate, you know, attending a couple of meetings in August, potentially September, maybe even into October. You know, just because we hold this public meeting doesn't mean we stop that engagement. I think, in fact, it will grow from here. So just kind of wanted to touch on that. But yeah, and then the next question was about the no planned public meetings. Again, on this schedule, there really aren't any additional planned public meetings other than the public meetings that are held that the University City Council holds or the Commission holds. But we could always work that in if there is the public sentiment to support that. Janet, did you want to add anything about the public meetings or the schedule kind of moving forward?
No, I think that was a great summary, Matt. So no, I think that about covers it. But I guess the main summary thought is we'll be responsive and we'll be continuing to communicate with the commission and the council, and those meetings remain open. And if another public meeting is, you know, requested by the city, then that's something we can do. I know there's a lot being thrown out and a lot to consider. So yeah, I think that about covers it.
Okay, great. Thanks. The next question is, any impact on property values, home saleability, or turnover acquisitions?
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So I'm not an economist by any stretch, but I am definitely tracking that this is a concern for folks that, you know, if they're impacted by flooding and they're thinking about, you know, what would happen if I flood-proof my home or I elevate it and lift it up, you know, does that change the property value? And would someone want to buy it as much as it is right now? I would say that with the flood-proofing and elevation on their own, I mean, they would reduce flood risk. And that is always something that a new owner wants to hear. You know, if there used to be flooding there, but there isn't now, or it's being managed and there's, you know, no impact to your utilities when a flood happens, that's a benefit. So that should have a positive impact on property value. I know there's also concerns about where the utilities might go if they are moved in the home. So that is something where if it takes up living space, then it might be kind of a net zero, where you lose that living space, but you get that benefit from flood. So yeah, that is a very unofficial way of saying we do take those things into account, but we don't have them broken out right now. And so
yeah, and following along with that, Janet, I was going to just mention that I think the question has come up a couple of times before as well about basements, not just the utilities, but just, you know, storage space in basements. So if I lose my basement because you potentially, you know, fill it in and allow water to come in, well, then I lose the ability to store things in the basement or use it as living space or what have you. And again, I think those are things that we consider, but a lot of those flood-proofing measures are also voluntary. And so you the homeowner or business owner kind of have that choice of whether or not you want to participate. And if, for example, like you were talking about elevating utilities, if there isn't space available in your home, then there are mechanisms where you can say, you know, you have to add those to the outside and build some sort of pad for you know, the furnace or the other kinds of, you know, utilities that you might have in your basement. And so those are options. And it might also be the case where rather than do that, you may just want to, elevate your home in lieu of the floodproofing, because it at least could be, help to lower your premiums for flood insurance if you do the elevation versus just the floodproofing. So those are questions that we're still working on as well with FEMA, and just how these decisions would impact the individual homeowner or business owner.
And Matt, I thought of one thing I would add to that too, just in case we didn't make it clear earlier on. With floodproofing and elevation and those voluntary non-structural things, there would be no cost to the homeowner for implementing those. So this is entirely paid for. So even if you're thinking, well, the value of my home might change, at least the change itself and that reduction in flood risk is at no cost to you. So I just wanted to make that very clear.
Yeah, for sure. And there was another comment later that I think may have been private. It was just to me, the host, but I think it, kind of addresses this issue. So the question was, will the city have to take out or issue a bond from the public? And do you know how other municipalities have paid for these types of projects? That kind of goes to like what you were just talking about, Janet, with, it's no cost to the taxpayer. However, if the city's using tax money for it, then it kind of is. But you know what I'm saying. I would say other funding sources could be grants. It could be bonds. We've seen where, certain propositions that have been voted on by the public to create another funding mechanism. That's common in a couple of other cities in the county, or a couple of other, cities within St. Louis County. That's just a revenue stream. So I wanted to touch on that. And while I, of course, can't speak for the city on how they would plan on paying for that, I think based on what Sinan was saying earlier, a lot of how you determine where the funds are coming from is how much it's going to be. And so there are some rough numbers in the draft report of what those costs would be, like construction costs. But those will be a lot more defined and refined as we go through the planning process. So as we kind of nail down, okay, does the city want to go with the detention basin? Well, then we can really cost out and be very, very specific on the cost of that and what the construction costs would be and the interest during construction and all those details. Those will be kind of later on in the report process and the feasibility process. So I just want to make sure I'm hitting on some of these other questions I see coming up in the chat. And then the last question in the first part was just about, will the presentation slides be available after the meeting? And that is an absolute yes. So they will be on our website, which you can see on the current slide that's up. And then you can also point your smartphone, turn your camera on and point it at the screen, and it should pick up that QR code, and then it will open up a web browser, and you can get right on our website. All right, the next question, Janet, was about, are the minority participants currently living in the flood areas, or is that the total minority population of the city? Please clarify that statistic of minorities of 52%.
Yeah, so that was developed from the 2010 census data using the EJ Screen tool that pulls directly from that 2010 data, and that's for the university city as a whole, not the study area. Good question.
All right, thanks for that. The next question is, can you provide an example of where you have used this process before and what the reports looked like? What the process looked like? What was the community participation? I don't know, Janet, if you have any examples in mind. I might have a couple.
Well, I'll say a couple of things and then I'll hand it right back to you then. So yeah, so we're aware of several examples. Obviously, the Corps of Engineers does studies like this all the time. So using this process, this is a typical process that is used, and the reports are all in a very similar format to each other. They have to include several sections that help us comply with laws and regulations. The process can be different between different studies, depending on what the problem is and who needs to be involved and the type of solutions that are considered. But in terms of community participation, there are definitely similarities where there's that scoping meeting, for example, the one that we had back in September. Then at this point, now that we have a TSP, that's another meeting, and then ongoing stakeholder engagement. That's very typical for us. We do have several sort of reference studies that we've been looking at from other districts and also sort of St. Louis district. And each of those studies kind of was a little bit different from this one, so we've tried to triangulate and see what was useful. I will say that the non-structural measures, so that floodproofing and elevation, acquisition, those types of things, they've tended to be less common solutions in these other studies, so we're definitely trying to chart our own course and find something that really works here for University City specifically, and it's been an interesting learning curve for us for sure. So we appreciate the city and the commission's patience with us as we move through the process. But in terms of example reports, we do have a couple that will look similar but have different outcomes. And Matt, if you wanted to mention any by name, we could do that, or again put those out. Maybe on the webpage, just as sort of other examples, but they really are sort of apples to oranges in a lot of ways. But yeah. I'll pass the message.
Yeah, I agree with you, Janet. It's really hard to compare, reports and other studies, but I can name a couple that I know. For example, the city of Eureka, they have participated in conducted a lot of dry flood proofing, where they have installed on their community center as well as a couple of buildings in their downtown area. And so they put these stop logs in the door frames to where, they go up, let's say, 4 or 5 feet. And so the building doesn't experience any water damage. It keeps all the water out. And then they elevated the air conditioner and all of those units on the roof. And so that was able to really reduce all flood damage to the building. Now, again, we've kind of strayed away from the dry flood proofing because those are active measures that include, like, people have to physically go out and do those things. And so when you've got a flash flood or a flashy river like River Tapare, we don't want to count on people being able to do that or being home or being able to have enough warning time to go out and do that. So there are other examples of wet flood proofing as well. Of course, there's other levees around this, St. Louis area that kind of are examples of those measures. But yeah, I would say if somebody would like other examples, there's plenty on our website. So if you go click on that link that's on the screen right now, there are lots of other projects that can be accessed from our website. And then, of course, there's core districts all around the country that, like you said, Janet, do this kind of stuff all the time. So the next question was about how many houses are projected to be in a possible buyout area?
Yeah, so I'll go back to a slide that showed a whole bunch of houses that were assessed. If all of these structures that were assessed to have damage during the 25-year flood, that would be approximately 500. So that was just an analysis that was used to kind of move forward with the numbers and see what that would look like. Again, this would not be a final solution. And in fact, the numbers, the net benefits and the benefit to cost ratio showed that this would be a lot more expensive for less benefit as compared with the floodproofing and elevation of structures. So as of right now, we're not looking at buyouts as a competitive solution. I will say that as we further refine the tentatively selected plan, there may be some structures that are, severely flooded, repeatedly flooded, and if the owners in particular are saying, we really would like to move away, like this is not working for us, we would not like to try and elevate or flood-proof, like maybe geographically it's more of an isolated location and it's hard to get out and evacuate, then that's definitely still an option to have sort of smaller amounts of acquisition. But yeah, as of right now, a large buyout area is not a front runner in the planning process.
Thanks, Janet. And then kind of the next question is also on the theme of buyouts. So will buyout houses be taken off the tax rolls, and what is the impact to city property tax revenues? I think I can maybe take this one, not speaking on behalf of the city, of course, but yeah, I think that's a good point, that when you do buy out houses and you put easements on that land that doesn't allow homes to be rebuilt, that would definitely impact the city's tax revenues, and that's a choice that the city has to make based on its citizens' feedback. So it definitely would have an impact, but again, if we don't have any buyouts that are part of the plan, then there wouldn't necessarily be any impacts. The next question is, are these retention basins similar in design and locations, similar to the ones proposed by MSD?
Yeah, so again, I might pass the mic over to Jeff Reepe from MSD. Fortunately, we've been in contact, so he's kind of seen these basins take shape in our planning process. But yeah, I'm not too familiar with the ones that MSD had planned, only that there was a location that was similar. So, Jeff?
Yeah, so the basins that the Corps has proposed are, again, one of them is in a similar location to what MSD had originally considered. That was the one that's, I believe, at the Seafood City site that was discussed earlier. But again, those basins were to address sewer backups and flooding of the sewer system. And so they had a different ultimate goal than the project that the Corps is addressing here, which is flooding from the river. And certainly at some point, sometimes those two kind of can get merged together. But ultimately, MSD's goal was to stop basement backups, or to address basement backups, rather than to directly impact the water coming from the river. So I guess, are they in similar locations? Yes, one of them is in similar locations, but I think we discussed earlier that MSD's kind of pulled back on that site at the present time.
Matt or Janet, may I ask something?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's my understanding that the detention basins, they're like more like an open depression in the ground. They're not a container. My understanding is that the MSD project were actual storage containers and not open ground areas. Is that what the detention basins that you're proposing are, is just open areas?
Yes, what the Corps is proposing would be very similar to this graphic on the right, where it's open air, correct.
Right, and then if Jeff would chime in, but I believe that the MSD proposal was for actual storage containers, similar to the storage container that's on Cypress Road 170 by the airport. Is that not correct, Jeff?
That is correct. I think they looked at multiple different kind of configurations of whether the water would be pumped into the tank. I think maybe what MSD was looking at is probably better referenced as a tank versus a basin. And maybe if we use that terminology, that would help clarify. The idea for the MSD basins was to store excess water that was in the sewer system and that water would be taken out of the sewer system and stored, and then, which then would reduce the amount of backups or the, how much water was in the downstream system, allowing more capacity down there. And then after the storm event was over, then that water would then slowly be metered back into the system at a rate that would not cause any issues or problems.
Thank you for that clarification.
Certainly.
How many acre feet of storage are in these two proposed basins?
I'm afraid I don't know how many acre feet off the top of my head. Only the acreage on the land surface of 15 acres and 9 acres. We do have our hydrologist on the call, as I believe. If I can check on the list here, he may have had to drop off. Oh,
no, it looks like he's on, Janet.
Okay, yeah.
Joel, are you out there?
Hi, Janet. It's Joel. Yeah, hi, I'm Joel Asensis. I'm the hydraulic engineer on it. Dr. Chris, the question's kind of difficult to answer because there's an impact all the way up through the 500-year event. So really, kind of the best way to look at it is the bigger the area of the basin, the better it'll be. Now, as far as digging down, we'll dig down as far as we possibly can to get as close to the utilities as we can to maximize that storage. But that's kind of the whole design process with this. Janet?
Thanks, Joel.
Okay, and then the next question has to do, Janet, with, I believe it's slide 40, and it was to explain the graph percentages on the axis. I think it was just the participation graphs. Can you go a little bit more into what those percentages mean, Janet?
Sure. And I will be honest with all of you, this was my attempt to add a little excitement to this slide. So it depends on how you define excitement. But I wanted to just show basically that the Corps of Engineers participation rate analysis, so on our side of things, we'll be looking at what would happen if 25% of structure owners participated in floodproofing and elevation. That's orange, and 50% with the blue, and then 75% with the green. So once we run all of those three different sets of numbers, we can see kind of the range of possible outcomes. And so if we end up having very low participation, like at least we've accounted for that, we can tell that, the project is or is not still viable if there's not very much interest, or if there's a lot of interest in that 75%, it just helps us cover the bases and understand what the range of possible outcomes are and range of possible cost commitments as well. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer, but I just thought I'd throw some numbers and some colors on there to kind of show our participation analysis.
Yeah, thanks for that, Janet. I do think it made the slide better, for sure. So the next question is, what do you consider successful public participation? We're a city of 35,000. What is considered realistic, substantial, and meaningful? I think I can take a stab at it first. So I don't know that we can answer, air quotes, successful public participation. What I can say is that I think in this particular project, we've been on more public meetings and on more public meeting agendas than any other project that I've really been a part of. So, we've been on open agendas for both the Stormwater Commission as well as the City Council a couple of different times, as well as, hosting our own public meeting before, and then the one tonight, and then, of course, the one we're going to host hopefully next week because of the issues tonight. So I don't know, Janet, if you wanted to give your side of what successful public participation is, but I definitely would look to receive several emails in the next couple of days, couple of weeks. And I think if we do, then that will be a really good start. But what do you think, Janet?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great definition and place to start. I haven't been on too many of these, but I would say that just meaningful engagement is the main thing that we would look for to be successful. So people contacting us about the flooding issues, bringing us information that we may or may not know, even if you think we might know something already, let us know anyway, because we might not, or we may just really appreciate the confirmation of knowing what the flood impact has looked like to you. I would also say that input that helps us tell the story is very important. So, if you want to just share what flooding has been like for you, the impact that it's had on your life and your family's life or your business, do share that. And that is definitely meaningful, and we appreciate that. It helps us tell the story within the Corps and helps us get funding eventually to bring this home and bring it to completion. So, yeah, I'd say, if you have a story to share or information, data, all of that is meaningful and contributes to, successful public input. So feel free to share.
Yeah, thank you. And then the next couple of questions also have to do with the public comment theme. And as I stated a little while ago, we will make sure that we put the questions and comments that we've received in the chat box tonight. We'll put that on the website, and then the questions will be part of the official public comment record, which will be in the report. But we'll do our best to get the questions out of here, get good answers, post those on our website so that everybody can see them. And I think that's good. The next question talked about what is being proposed for street flooding due to inadequate storm drains.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that I would say to that question is, so unfortunately, this study is limited to flooding from the river. So it can be connected to that kind of stormwater and street flooding, but typically it's, we're constrained to looking at flooding of the river rising up out of its banks. So, but I know that University City is very engaged on this issue and on stormwater planning. So, perhaps someone from the city or the commission would like to take this question while we're on this topic.
Sanan, do you have anything to say on that?
I want to mention that the University City is getting started on a stormwater master planning effort, and there will be interest in identifying those types of issues under that study in terms of inadequate storm drains and yard flooding. The issues that, as Janet described, that could be related to the rivers, swelling during those events, because then, the discharge of those interceptors are being affected. But then, there may not be a river issue necessarily, but these areas locally may still be experiencing flooding. So those are, those are good topics that will be certainly included in the stormwater master planning.
I would add that, that is the topic that is in the scope of what the Stormwater Issues Commission is covering, and we are looking for comments from the public on that. The other thing that I would add is that the Army Corps study is going to continue. As it continues, it will remain. The study will remain as old business item on the agenda for the monthly Stormwater Commission meetings. And so there is an opportunity there for public input, for anybody who wishes to speak up or to make a specific request.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. All right, I think we only have one or two more questions, and then there were some comments individually that I received, so I'll can touch on those separately. But the next question, Janet, was, I'm a U Heights resident. Is there coordination with Metropolitan Sewer District? I thought the work they did recently was to have solved many of the flooding issues. It resulted in my home being taken out of the floodplain such that I no longer require flood insurance, but the recent rain event caused flooded basements on my street. Will your retention ponds alleviate the problem in U Heights?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If you're able to follow up perhaps after this meeting, perhaps with a street name or address, that would definitely help us, get to your question in a little bit more detail, since I'm not sure exactly where you're talking about. But the general idea with the detention basins is definitely to reduce the peak of those floods. So any rain event that comes down, the peak would come down, the elevation of the flood would come down. And so, yes, it should cause less backup to structures. So, yeah, I guess I would encourage you to follow up at that U-City flood risk email address if you'd like more detailed information. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. And I agree. There's another question that was made privately to me, but it talks about how to send in comments to the Stormwater Commission. So, Mr. Thompson, would you like to address how to get questions or comments from the public to you all?
Well, I would recommend University City website is always a good portal. We don't have a page. There is a page on Commission on Stormwater Issues, but there are no links on that right now as to ways of inputting questions. But there is a general portal on the website at the bottom of the toolbar that says make a request. So I would suggest right now that might be the best way to go, and it's got a form that allows you to fill out your name and information, and you can make a request, and you can address it to the Stormwater Commission.
Sure, and I would also add, Mr. Thompson, that if we get any questions to this U-City flood risk at usace.army.mil email, we of course can work closely with the commission and the city as well, UCNON, and we can get questions answered, and we can relay those questions, and we hope that you would do the same with us. But we've been working very well together, so I think we can make that happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, I am the staff liaison to the commission. So any questions that are related to me, that I'm responsible to, get them over to the commission and coordinate with Mr. Thompson to incorporate those to our agendas. And so my email address is sinan, SINAN, @ucitymol.org.
Thanks, Sinan. I think there's one other question that was a private question, but I think it could be worthy of an answer. So shouldn't the Army Corps and MSD get on the same page before a final report or decision is made? I think I can take a stab at the question first, and that is that, our non-federal sponsor is the City of University City, but of course MSD is a stakeholder. The public is a stakeholder. The commission is a stakeholder as well as a technical expertise group. So yeah, I think that as we move forward with this draft report, which is what's being released tonight, and we kind of further refine the TSP, as Janet, you were talking about, we definitely do want to get on the same page, and that's what we're hoping to do somewhere in that September-ish timeframe, late September timeframe, so that everybody feels comfortable with the decisions that are made, and there is ample time for public comment to be included. But yeah, so there really has to be an agreement between the Corps and the city as our non-federal sponsor before a final report or decision is made. So that's kind of a requirement to move forward. And the study process as well, of course, is like a funding partnership. So, Janet, did you want to add anything on that, or did I cover it okay?
I think you covered it. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so definitely.
Right. Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat. I don't believe I see any other questions. If you were one of the people that did submit a comment or a question in the chat box, if you want to email us, privately, you can, or if you want to reach out to us via letter, you can see my address on the screen. It's the federal building, but they will get routed to me. I just want to make sure that I'm answering all the questions, and sometimes it gets hard to not be able to talk, with you over the phone. So I'd be more than happy to call you if anybody has any questions or comments. Yeah, I guess we can open it up for the last few minutes that we have. Is there anybody that has any last-minute questions or comments on the call? Okay, I'm not hearing any. I did want to thank everyone for calling in tonight. I know there were some technical issues, and so we will get with the city to have a round 2 presentation hopefully next week. I want to thank all of the commission for being here, the city council for being here, all of the Corps employees who are on the call, as well as you, Janet, for the presentation, and also our MSD partner as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll leave this screen on for a couple more minutes. That way, if you want to take down notes or anything, you feel free to do that, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks all. Have a good night.